The giant space prison ship called Void Breaker moved through the dark, empty space between stars. Inside this massive metal ship were the most dangerous criminals from 12 different worlds. The ship was so big that it took 10 minutes to walk, from one end to the other. Its walls were thick metal and its cells were built to hold beings that could break through stone with their bare hands. Commander Velkos stood in the main control room, looking at the screens that showed information about new prisoners. He was tall like a tree and had dark green scales covering his body like armor. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light as he looked at the files of criminals from Earth. Behind him stood other alien guards who looked very different from humans. Some had 4 arms, others had tentacles instead of hands, and some had skin that changed colors. Velkos pointed at the screen with one long clawed finger and started laughing. The sound was like a snake hissing mixed with the roar of a wild animal. "Look at these weak humans," he said to his guards. "They think they are dangerous criminals, but they are just small, soft creatures who break easily." The other guards joined in laughing. Their different voices created a strange chorus of sounds that echoed through the metal halls of the ship. On the screen were pictures and information about human criminals. There were bank robbers who stole money, murderers who killed people, and drug dealers who sold dangerous substances. To the aliens, these crimes seemed like child play. In their worlds, criminals could destroy entire cities or kill hundreds of beings in minutes. Human criminals seemed weak and pathetic compared to what they were used to dealing with. Among the new prisoners being brought onto the ship was a small human woman named Park Mina. She was only 5 feet tall, which made her shorter than most alien children. Her black hair was cut short and neat. Her brown eyes looked calm and peaceful like still water in a quiet pond. She wore the orange prison clothes that all new inmates received. To anyone looking at her, she seemed like the least dangerous person on the entire ship. The alien guards processed her paperwork while making jokes about humans. Officer Zek, who had blue skin and 3 eyes, pointed at Park Mina and said, "What could this tiny creature possibly do to hurt anyone? She looks like she would run away if a space mouse looked at her wrong." The guards laughed so hard that some of them had tears coming from their various types of eyes. They read her crime record out loud for entertainment. "Assassination," they said while laughing even harder. This small human female was arrested for assassination. What did she assassinate? They joked. Maybe she killed an insect or a small plant. The guards thought they were very funny and continued making jokes as they put her information into the computer system. What the aliens did not know was that Park Mina had another name that struck fear into the hearts of criminals across Earth. They called her Baba Yaga. For 15 years, she had been the most feared person in Earth underground crime world. She was not famous for being big or strong. She was famous for being able to appear anywhere like a ghost, eliminate her target with perfect accuracy, and disappear without anyone seeing how she did it. Park Mina had killed corrupt politicians who took money from poor people. She had eliminated crime bosses who hurt innocent families. She had stopped evil people who thought they were too powerful to be punished. The police on Earth could never catch her because she was too smart and too skilled. Even when they knew she was coming, they could not stop her or find her after she completed her mission. The alien guards threw her into a cell with other small-time criminals. They put her with prisoners who had committed minor crimes like theft or small fights. The guards thought this was appropriate because they saw her as weak and harmless. They did not put her in the maximum security area where the most dangerous prisoners were kept. This was their first big mistake. Park Mina sat quietly in her new cell and began to watch everything around her. She observed the guards and how they walked their routes. She noticed which cameras could see what areas and which spots were hidden from view. She watched the other prisoners and learned who was dangerous and who was just trying to survive. She did all of this without anyone noticing that she was studying them. The other human prisoners in her cell block were scared. There was Kim Dae, who was a thin, nervous man who jumped at every loud sound. There was also Lee Soo, who was a young woman who cried quietly at night because she missed her family. These humans stayed close together because they knew the aliens saw them as easy targets for abuse and entertainment. As the Voidbreaker continued its journey through space toward the maximum security prison on Kepler Prime, the alien guards felt very pleased with themselves. They had successfully processed another group of pathetic human criminals. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had no idea that sitting quietly in cell block C was a small Korean woman who had spent years learning how to do impossible things. The ship moved through the darkness of space carrying its cargo of criminals toward their destination. In a few days they would arrive at the prison planet where these beings would spend the rest of their lives locked away from civilization. The guards went about their normal duties feeling confident that everything was under control. They had dealt with dangerous prisoners before and they knew how to maintain order on their ship. But none of them had ever dealt with someone like Park Mina. None of them had ever encountered a human who could walk through walls like they were made of air. None of them had ever seen someone who could appear and disappear like smoke in the wind. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who do not look dangerous at all. They were about to discover why the name Baba Yaga made grown men wake up screaming from nightmares on Earth. Life on the prison ship. Voidbreaker followed very strict rules that everyone understood without being told. The strongest and most dangerous prisoners ruled over everyone else. At the very top of this system were the Thrakari warriors. These beings were 8 feet tall and had 4 powerful arms that could crush metal. Their skin was thick like natural armor and their strength was legendary across the galaxy. Below the Thrakari were the Zeltans who had sharp poisonous claws that could kill with just a small scratch. They were not as big as the Thrakari, but they were very cunning and knew how to use their deadly poison to control other prisoners. After the Zeltans came various other alien species who had their own special abilities that made them dangerous. At the very bottom of this prison hierarchy were the humans. Every alien on the ship saw humans as weak, soft creatures who could not defend themselves. The guards often made jokes about how humans had no natural weapons like claws or teeth. They had no thick skin to protect them, and no poison to make their enemies afraid. To all the aliens, humans seemed like helpless children who needed to be protected or bullied depending on the mood of whoever was bigger than them. Park Mina spent her first week on the ship, watching and learning everything she could about how this system worked. She saw which guards were cruel, and which ones just did their jobs without hurting anyone extra. She noticed that some guards took bribes from rich prisoners while others could not be bought with money or favors. She memorized the daily schedule of when meals were served and when prisoners were allowed out of their cells. Every day she watched the security cameras and learned their patterns. Some cameras moved back and forth covering different areas, while others stayed in one position all the time. She found spots where the cameras could not see and corridors where guards rarely walked. She studied the air vents and maintenance tunnels that were used by repair crews. All of this information went into her memory like pieces of a puzzle that would be useful later. The other human prisoners tried to stay invisible and avoid trouble. Kim Dae, who had been caught stealing food to feed his family, kept his head down and spoke in whispers. Lee Soo, who had been arrested for protesting against corrupt government. Officials spent most of her time reading books and trying to stay out of everyone's way. The few other humans on the ship had learned that the best way to survive was to be quiet and hope the aliens would ignore them. But even when humans tried to stay invisible, they still became targets for entertainment. Alien prisoners would push them around during mealtime just to watch them stumble. Guards would give them extra work assignments that were designed to be humiliating. Some aliens would steal their food rations knowing that humans were too afraid to complain to anyone in authority. The unofficial king of all prisoners on the Voidbreaker was a massive Thrakari named Brutal Claw. He had earned his name by killing 17 different beings with just his 4 bare hands during various fights in prisons across the galaxy. His reputation was so scary that even the guards treated him with extra respect. When Brutal Claw wanted something, every prisoner on the ship worked to get it for him as quickly as possible. Brutal Claw ruled through fear and violence. He had claimed the best cell for himself and demanded that other prisoners bring him the choicest food from their meals. Anyone who refused to obey his commands would be beaten so badly that they needed medical attention. The guards allowed this to happen because it made their job easier when one prisoner kept all the others in line. During meal times, Brutal Claw would sit at the center table in the mess hall like a king holding court. Other powerful prisoners would sit near him, hoping to gain his favor. Weaker prisoners would stay as far away as possible and eat their food quickly before leaving. The humans always sat together at a small table in the corner, where they hoped no one would notice them. For the first week, Park Mina followed this pattern like all the other humans. She would enter the mess hall quietly, get her food without making eye contact with anyone, and sit with Kim Dae and Lee Soo at their corner table. She ate her meals in silence while continuing to observe everything that happened around her. The aliens began to think of her as just another scared human who knew her place in the prison hierarchy. But Park Mina was not scared. She was planning. Every day she learned more about the ship and its inhabitants. She discovered which prisoners were truly evil and enjoyed hurting others, and which ones were just trying to survive in a bad situation. She identified the guards who were corrupt and cruel versus those who were just doing their jobs. All of this information was being stored in her mind like ammunition for a war that only she knew was coming. The aliens had no idea that they were being studied by someone who had spent 15 years learning how to eliminate targets in impossible situations. They did not know that the quiet human woman was actually a master strategist who could plan complex operations while appearing to do nothing at all. They saw her small size and gentle appearance and assumed she was helpless. This was exactly what Park Mina wanted them to think. As the second week began, Brutal Claw decided it was time to establish his dominance over the new human prisoners. He had noticed that Park Mina seemed different from the others because she did not show obvious fear, like Kim Dae, or sadness, like Lee Soo. This bothered him because every prisoner on his ship needed to understand that he was in charge of everyone and everything. During the second week lunch period in the mess hall, Brutal Claw stood up from his table and looked around the room like a king surveying his kingdom. The massive Thrakari warrior was nearly 8 feet tall, and his forearms were thick with muscles that could bend steel bars. Every conversation in the room stopped as prisoners noticed their unofficial ruler was about to make an announcement. The mess hall fell completely silent, except for the humming of the ship's engines far below. Even the guards stopped what they were doing to watch because when Brutal Claw spoke, everyone listened whether they wanted to or not. His voice was deep and loud like thunder rolling across the sky during a storm. When he was angry, his voice could shake the metal walls of the ship. Small human female Brutal Claw announced while pointing one of his massive arms directly at Park Mina. She looked up from her meal with the same calm expression she always wore. Her brown eyes showed no fear or surprise, even though every other being in the room was terrified of what was about to happen. Kim Dae and Lee Soo tried to make themselves smaller in their seats while other prisoners leaned forward to watch the show. "You will clean my cell every day and bring me half of your food rations," Brutal Claw continued. His yellow eyes glowed with cruel amusement as he waited for her to beg or cry like humans usually did when he threatened them. "If you refuse, I will break every bone in your small, weak body very slowly, so everyone can hear you scream for mercy." The other prisoners nodded their heads because they had seen him carry out such threats before. This was how the prison hierarchy worked. The strong demanded obedience from the weak, and the weak had no choice but to submit or face terrible consequences. Every alien in the room expected Park Mina to immediately agree to his demands. Some of them felt sorry for her, but none of them would risk helping her, because that would only make Brutal Claw angry at them too. But Park Mina did something that shocked everyone in the mess hall. She looked directly at Brutal Claw for a few seconds as if she was considering his offer. Then she calmly turned her attention back to her meal and continued eating as if nothing had happened. The silence in the room became so complete that everyone could hear the sound of her spoon touching her bowl. Brutal Claw stared at her in complete disbelief. In all his years as the king of various prisons, no one had ever ignored his threats. Even the bravest warriors would at least acknowledge his words with a response even if they planned to fight back. But this small human was acting like he had not spoken at all. The other prisoners looked back and forth between them, wondering if they were witnessing the beginning of a massacre. The massive Thrakari felt his rage building like lava inside a volcano about to erupt. His 4 hands closed into fists that were each bigger than Park Mina's entire head. He had killed beings much larger than her for showing far less disrespect. Now this tiny creature was making him look foolish in front of everyone on the ship. He could not allow such defiance to go unpunished. Brutal Claw stepped away from his table and walked slowly toward Park Mina, like a predator approaching helpless prey. His heavy footsteps echoed through the mess hall as every prisoner watched to see what would happen next. The guards also watched, but none of them moved to intervene because fights between prisoners were considered entertainment, as long as they did not damage ship property. When he reached her table, Brutal Claw reached down with one of his massive arms to grab Parkmina by her neck and lift her into the air. This was his favorite way to show dominance because it made his victims feel completely helpless, while demonstrating his superior strength to everyone watching. He had done this same move hundreds of times to establish control over new prisoners. But something impossible happened that would be talked about for years by everyone who witnessed it. As Brutal Claw arm came down toward her Park, Mina moved in a way that seemed to defy the laws of physics. She slipped sideways under his reaching arm like water flowing around a rock. Her movement was so smooth and fast that most beings could barely see it happen. In the same fluid motion, Parkmina grabbed a metal eating utensil from her tray. Before anyone could understand what was happening, she had somehow moved behind Brutal Claw and driven the utensil into a specific spot just behind his left knee. The massive warrior let out a roar of pain and surprise as his legs stopped working and he crashed to the floor like a falling tree. Brutal Claw tried to get back up but found that he could not feel anything below his waist. The small human had somehow hit a nerve cluster that paralyzed his entire lower body. He looked up at her with confusion and fear in his eyes, because he could not understand how such a thing was possible. The most feared prisoner on the ship had been defeated in less than 3 seconds by someone a quarter of his size. Parkmina leaned down and whispered something in Brutal Claw's ear that made his yellow eyes grow wide with terror. Whatever she said caused the massive warrior to stop struggling and start breathing very fast like he was having a panic attack. Then she calmly walked back to her table, sat down, and continued eating her meal as if nothing unusual had happened. The entire mess hall remained frozen in shocked silence as every alien tried to process what they had just witnessed. The guards looked at each other with confusion because nothing in their training had prepared them for this situation. The prisoners stared at Parkmina with a mixture of fear and amazement, because they had just seen the impossible happen before their eyes. News of what happened in the mess hall spread through the prison ship faster than fire through dry grass. Within hours, every prisoner and guard on the Void Breaker had heard some version of the story. Most aliens could not believe that a small human had defeated Brutal Claw so easily. Some thought it was just a lucky accident, while others began to suspect there was more to Parkmina than anyone had realized. The guards tried to maintain order by treating the incident as a minor fight between prisoners. They moved Brutal Claw to the medical bay where doctors confirmed that he was paralyzed from the waist down, but would eventually recover. They questioned Parkmina about what happened, but she simply said she had defended herself when attacked. Her calm manner and simple explanation made it seem like the whole thing was not important. But 3 more impossible things happened that same day, which made some beings start to worry. A Zeltan prisoner named Poison Fang tried to steal food from Parkmina during dinner time. The next morning he woke up to find that his own poisonous claws had somehow been turned around and were now stuck deep into his own hands. He was in terrible pain and could not remember how it had happened. Later that evening, 2 Morphean brothers who were known for working together to hurt smaller prisoners cornered Parkmina in an empty corridor. They planned to teach her a lesson for embarrassing Brutal Claw. But when other prisoners found them an hour later, both brothers were hanging upside down from the ceiling pipes, unconscious. There was no rope or chain holding them up there and no way to explain how they had gotten into that position. The most disturbing part was that when the brothers woke up, they had no memory of what had happened to them. They remembered following Parkmina into the corridor, but then their memories went completely blank until they woke up hanging from the ceiling. The ship doctors could find no injuries on their bodies and no drugs in their systems that would explain their memory loss. Security Chief Zarn was a careful and methodical being who took pride in maintaining perfect order on his ship. He had compound eyes that could see in many directions at once and tentacle arms that could work on multiple tasks simultaneously. He had been running prison ships for 20 years and had never encountered a situation he could not handle through proper procedures and overwhelming force. But the strange incidents involving Parkmina bothered him because they did not make logical sense. How could such a small human defeat much larger and stronger opponents so easily? How could she cause injuries to beings without leaving any evidence of how she had done it? How could she make prisoners forget what had happened to them? None of this fit with anything he knew about human capabilities. Zarn decided to investigate Park Mina background more thoroughly. He accessed the Earth criminal database expecting to find records of petty crimes or minor violence. What he discovered instead made his tentacles curl up with fear. The file that appeared on his screen was classified at the highest level of galactic security. Only planetary governors and fleet commanders were supposed to be able to read such information. Park Mina was also known by the codename Baba Yaga according to her file. She was listed as an extremely dangerous individual responsible for over 300 confirmed eliminations across Earth. The file described her as a ghost-like assassin who could infiltrate any location, eliminate any target, and escape without leaving a trace. Earth government had specifically requested her transfer to Galactic custody because their own prisons could not hold her. But it was the witness accounts in her file that made Zarn realize how serious their situation had become. Crime bosses described her appearing in locked rooms with no possible entry point. Security footage showed her walking through laser grids that should have been impossible to bypass. Military commanders reported entire squads of elite soldiers found unconscious with no memory of being attacked. One report from Earth law enforcement was particularly disturbing. They had surrounded a building where Park Mina was supposedly hiding with 200 officers and military vehicles. They had thermal scanners, motion detectors, and every possible type of detection equipment. But when they entered the building, it was completely empty, and she was never found. 3 days later, the corrupt mayor who had ordered her capture was found dead in his locked office with no signs of how anyone had entered or left. Zarn realized that they were not dealing with a normal prisoner. They had somehow captured one of the most dangerous beings in known space and put her in general population with minor criminals. This was like putting a nuclear bomb in a box of firecrackers and hoping nothing would explode. He immediately ordered Park Mina to be moved to maximum security isolation where she could be properly contained. But when the guards arrived at her cell, they found it empty. The locks were intact and showed no signs of being tampered with. The security cameras showed no one entering or leaving the cell area. Park Mina had simply vanished into thin air like smoke disappearing in the wind. The guards searched frantically through every part of the ship but found no trace of her anywhere. Panic began to spread through the crew as they realized their most dangerous prisoner was now loose somewhere on the ship. Zarn ordered all security, cameras to be monitored constantly, and all guard patrols to be doubled. He sent messages to every section of the ship, warning that an extremely dangerous individual was on the loose and should not be approached without backup. But Park Mina had become invisible like a ghost walking through the walls of the ship. The guards could feel her presence everywhere but could never find her. Security cameras would malfunction at just the right moments to hide her movements. Motion sensors would trigger in empty corridors while she somehow moved through areas that should have detected her. The crew of the Voidbreaker began to understand that they were no longer in control of their own ship. Somewhere in the darkness between the metal walls and through the maze of corridors moved a being who could do impossible things. The Baba Yaga was loose and hunting, and no one knew who her next target would be. The lights on the Voidbreaker began to flicker and go out section by section like candles being blown out by an invisible wind. The ship systems that had worked perfectly for years suddenly started having mysterious problems. Security cameras would stop working just when guards needed them most. Door locks would jam at the worst possible times. Air circulation fans would turn off in areas where corrupt guards were stationed, making those sections uncomfortably hot and stuffy. Park Mina had become like a ghost living in the walls of the ship. She used maintenance tunnels and air vents to move around without being seen. She had memorized every pipe and wire and hidden passage during her weeks of observation. Now she moved through the ship like she owned it, while the crew stumbled around in confusion trying to figure out what was happening to their once orderly vessel. But Park Mina was not randomly causing chaos just to create problems. Everything she did had a purpose and followed a careful plan. She was not interested in killing people or destroying the ship. Instead, she wanted to change how things worked on the Voidbreaker. She wanted to stop the cruelty and abuse that made life miserable for weak prisoners. She wanted to teach the aliens that humans deserved respect. Her first targets were the most corrupt guards who enjoyed hurting prisoners for entertainment. Officer Grex was a cruel being who would beat prisoners for minor rule violations. One night he went to sleep in his quarters and woke up to find his room completely rearranged. His furniture was hanging from the ceiling, and his personal belongings were arranged to spell out words that said, "Stop hurting innocent people or else." Sergeant Vole was another guard who took bribes from rich prisoners while making poor prisoners' lives miserable. He discovered that all his weapons had been taken apart and reassembled into shapes that looked like flowers. When he tried to put them back together properly, he found that critical pieces were missing. No matter how much he searched his quarters, he could not find the missing parts that would make his weapons work again. Captain Tor was the worst of all the guards because he would sell extra food rations to wealthy prisoners while letting poor ones go hungry. He woke up one morning to find that someone had filled his quarters with the same terrible prison food that hungry prisoners had to eat. There were hundreds of bowls of the awful gray mush covering every surface in his room. A note attached to his mirror said, "Now you know how it feels to have nothing but bad food." The 3 corrupt guards reported these incidents to Security Chief Zarn, but he was dealing with his own problems. His security cameras were being controlled by someone who seemed to know more about the ship systems than he did. Whenever he tried to track Park Mina, the cameras would mysteriously point in the wrong directions or show nothing but static motion. Detectors would go off in empty rooms while she somehow moved through areas that should have triggered alarms. Meanwhile, the prison population was beginning to change as word spread about the small human who fought back against the established order. Other human prisoners like Kim Dae and Lee Soo found that they were no longer being pushed around by alien bullies. Whenever someone tried to threaten them, they would mysteriously find themselves in embarrassing situations that made other prisoners laugh at them instead of fear them. A group of Zeltan prisoners who had been stealing food from humans discovered that their own meals had been replaced with something that tasted terrible and made them sick to their stomachs for days. Morphian prisoners who enjoyed intimidating smaller beings found themselves waking up in strange places like storage closets or hanging from ceiling pipes with no memory of how they had gotten there. The smaller alien species who had been victims of the prison hierarchy began to notice that their tormentors were having more and more mysterious accidents. Bullies would find their personal belongings missing or damaged in ways that seemed impossible. Violent prisoners would discover that their weapons had been sabotaged to malfunction at critical moments during fights. Some of the more intelligent prisoners began to realize that these incidents were not random accidents. Someone was systematically targeting the worst bullies and most corrupt individuals on the ship, while protecting those who were innocent or just trying to survive. The pattern was too perfect to be coincidence, and too complex to be the work of multiple people acting independently. As days passed, the atmosphere on the ship completely changed. Guards who had been cruel and abusive became nervous and paranoid because they never knew when they might become the next target. Prisoners who had ruled through fear and violence found that their victims were no longer afraid of them. The rigid hierarchy that had controlled every aspect of life on the Void Breaker was crumbling like a house built on sand. The breaking point came during the 3rd week when the 3 most corrupt guards, Officer Grex, Sergeant Vole, and Captain Tor, disappeared entirely during their night shift. Other guards found their stations abandoned with no signs of struggle or violence. Security cameras showed them beginning their patrol routes, but then the footage became corrupted and showed nothing useful for the rest of the night. 48 hours later, a maintenance crew found all 3 missing guards sealed inside emergency storage pods in the cargo bay. The pods were designed to keep people alive in case of ship emergencies, but they were never meant to be used as prisons. The 3 guards were alive and physically unharmed, but their minds seemed to have been broken by whatever they had experienced. When doctors tried to question them about what had happened, all they could say was Baba Yaga over and over again. Their eyes were wide with terror, and they would start shaking uncontrollably whenever anyone mentioned Park Mina name. The ship's medical staff had never seen such complete psychological trauma in beings who showed no signs of physical injury. Security. Chief Zarn realized that his ship was no longer under his control. Somewhere in the darkness of the corridors and maintenance areas moved a being who could do things that defied everything he understood about physics and human limitations. The Small Korean woman had become something more than human in the minds of everyone on the ship. She had become a force of nature that could not be stopped or controlled by normal means. The crew began to whisper stories about the Baba Yaga, who could walk through solid walls and appear anywhere at any time. They said she could read minds, and see the future and make people forget things that had happened to them. Some claimed she was not really human at all, but some kind of supernatural being that had taken human form to teach them a lesson about treating others with respect. 3 days later, the prison ship Voidbreaker limped into the space around Kepler Prime Station, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. The massive vessel that had left Earth space as a symbol of galactic prison authority now looked defeated and broken. Its crew moved nervously through corridors that had once been under their complete control. The rigid order that had defined life aboard the ship had been replaced by an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. Station Commander Admiral Voss was a veteran military officer who had fought in 12 different galactic wars and seen every kind of combat situation imaginable. He had dealt with prison riots, space pirate attacks, and alien invasions that threatened entire star systems. But the reports he received from the Voidbreaker described something he had never encountered before and did not fully understand. The ship's crew spoke in whispers about a small human woman who could walk through walls like they were made of air. They described someone who could appear anywhere at any time without triggering security systems or leaving any trace of her movements. Veteran guards who had faced down the galaxy's most dangerous criminals trembled with fear when asked to describe what they had witnessed during their journey. Admiral Voss decided to board the ship personally to investigate these impossible claims. He brought with him a team of security experts and medical specialists who were trained to deal with unusual situations. As they walked through the corridors of the Voidbreaker, they could feel the tension and fear that hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The first thing that struck the Admiral was how quiet and orderly everything seemed on the surface. There had been no riot or violent uprising that would explain the crew's psychological state. The ship systems were all functioning normally, and there were no signs of physical damage anywhere. But when he looked closely at the faces of guards and prisoners, alike he could see that something fundamental had changed about how the ship operated. Guards who had once strutted through the corridors with absolute authority now walked carefully and looked over their shoulders constantly. Prisoners who had lived in fear of daily beatings and abuse now moved with confidence and dignity. The cruel hierarchy that had dominated every aspect of life aboard the ship had somehow been completely dismantled without anyone being seriously injured or killed. When Admiral Voss asked to meet with Park Mina, he was taken to a simple cell in the general population area. Inside, he found a small Korean woman sitting peacefully on her bunk reading a book. She looked up when he entered, and he saw calm brown eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than the space between stars. There was nothing threatening or supernatural about her appearance, but something in her presence made him feel like he was meeting someone truly extraordinary. "You are the one they call Baba Yaga?" Admiral Voss asked through the communication panel built into the cell wall. Park Mina closed her book carefully and looked at him with the same gentle expression she had worn since the day she first came aboard the ship. She simply nodded her head once without speaking, as if words were unnecessary to confirm what everyone already knew. "Why did you not escape entirely?" the Admiral continued. "You clearly had the ability to leave this ship whenever you wanted. Our security experts cannot understand how you were able to move around without being detected, or how you accomplished the things that have been attributed to you. If you possess such extraordinary capabilities, why did you choose to remain in captivity?" Park Mina was quiet for a long moment, as if she was carefully considering how to answer his question. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and calm, like someone talking to a friend rather than a high-ranking military officer. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that made everyone in the room listen carefully to every syllable she uttered. "I did not come here to escape," she said, while looking directly into the Admiral's eyes. "I came here to teach a lesson that needed to be learned. Now everyone knows that Earth criminals are not weak. They are just different from what you expected. Some of us do not need size or strength or natural weapons like claws or poison. Some of us are something much more dangerous than that." She paused for a moment and smiled slightly, as if she was remembering something amusing. "We are human," she continued, "and that means we can do things that other beings think are impossible. We can adapt to any situation and find ways to survive, and succeed even when everything seems hopeless. We can be patient and careful and plan for years to achieve our goals. Most importantly, we can choose to be merciful even when we have the power to destroy those who have wronged us. Admiral Voss realized that he was listening to something that would change how the entire galactic prison system operated. The story of what happened aboard the Voidbreaker would spread to every prison ship and facility across known space. Guards would tell other guards about the small human woman who had dismantled their authority structure without killing anyone. Prisoners would whisper about the Baba Yaga, who had protected the innocent and punished the cruel. From that day forward, no alien guard would ever make the mistake of underestimating a prisoner from Earth. The name Baba Yaga became legendary throughout the galaxy as a symbol of hidden strength and unexpected capability. Military academies would study the incident as an example of how psychological warfare could be more effective than physical violence. Parkmina was eventually transferred to the maximum security facility on Kepler Prime, where she lived quietly and caused no further trouble. But her legend continued to grow as stories about her impossible abilities spread from prison to prison across the galaxy. Some said she could still appear and disappear at will, but chose to remain in her cell because she had already accomplished what she came to do. The guards who had survived their encounter with the Baba Yaga never forgot the lesson she had taught them about treating prisoners with basic dignity and respect. The corrupt officers who had terrorized innocent beings were never able to return to their duties because they remained too traumatized to function normally. The prison hierarchy that had allowed strong prisoners to abuse weak ones was replaced by a system that protected everyone regardless of their species or size. Years later, when young guards heard stories about the Baba Yaga, some would ask if she was real or just a legend created to scare them into treating prisoners properly. The veterans who had been aboard the Voidbreaker would always give the same answer. They would look serious and say that it did not matter if she was real or legend because the lesson she taught was true either way. Humans might look small and weak, but they possessed something that made them more dangerous than any creature in the galaxy. They possessed the intelligence, creativity, and determination to do impossible things when they decided something needed to be changed.